We're going to close out this chapter finishing up about long-term financing, a lot of risk in equity financing. What's interesting is in the last 15 years, we've had a large increase in the number of people that actually leave employment and they start their own business at the age of 55 plus. It used to be, you'd always talk about entrepreneurs being in that class where they start out at 20 to 35. That used to be the norm. And we've had a big pivot over here where people sit down there and they start pursuing their dreams and everything. And this over here, these two, they bought a franchise from Barkbusters, a dog training company. So they make their money on that and they probably have a lot of fun. But he went through his own equity and he cashed out the $85,000 to purchase their franchise. And so they developed their company in the process. So they had that whole business going on. So you want to talk about venture capitalists. Here's some of the things that you go through. You want to answer these 6 questions. A lot of times, if you're starting a business, you sit down and you go find venture capitalists, people interested in investment. You take them out to lunch, you show them your site, you tell them your dreams, you slide a business plan across the table and say, hey, by the way, can you toss in $200,000 for this company? You ask them the question. If you don't ask, the answer is the same as before. The worst they're going to say is no. You already had a no before you started. Now you got a no. But the best that'll happen is maybe they'll say yes. So you sit down and say, well, no, instead of 200,000, I'm going to give you $1 million. Now that would be a good day, wouldn't it? Okay, so here's the 6 questions you need to go through and keep in the back of your mind. I would sit down, if you're interested in your own company, make certain you keep at least this checklist because someday you may want to ask these 6 questions in a process. We also want to talk about on long-term financing, leverage and the cost of capital. And the cost of capital, you want to look at, okay, this is what capital is going to cost me in the process. So what is my return? If I'm going to get capital over here, here's what I have to earn or meet the demands of lenders. And that's a big thing. On the leverage, you need to raise money by borrowing to increase the firm's rate of return in the process. It's a big thing. Debt is always borrowing. Equity is always selling. They both have advantages. If you sit down and sell stock, you may be stuck with somebody you don't like or don't really know for the next umpteen years, for the entire life of the company, because they said the stock they own off to somebody else. But at least there's no repayment. On debt, you have to repay it in the process. So here's a chart that really will help you in the process of looking at equity versus debt in the process. So look on that aspect of it. If you're going to dive into this as to how you go through and how you account for it in the process. There's a couple of things that we learned in the recent Great Recession in 2009 or 2011. It really was one of the worst parts economically since the Great Depression. And then also we had COVID hit in 2020, which also some companies thrived and the other companies went totally down the tubes in the process. Sometimes government interfered. And when government interfered in the process, all of a sudden, a lot of times we find that overreach by the government damaged the economy much further than those states that didn't have the government stepping in and trying to involve themselves. Okay, so that being said, government is going to increase involvement intervention a lot of times anytime you have a financial crisis. Here's a couple of questions. I'm leaving in here for you to go through this on your own leisure in the process, but really on long-term financing, know what debt versus equity financing, which is better when, and what is a venture capitalist? Make sure you know that. Take care.